My friends and I were trick-or-treating a few years ago when we were 13 to 14 years old. This was our second year going without any of our parents coming with us, but we were pretty excited to run around the neighborhood collecting candy and having a good time. Something we do every year before Halloween was plan out our trick-or-treating route so that we could go to all the biggest houses in hopes to get full-sized candy bars. Earlier this year, a whole street of newly built luxury homes were finally finished and people had moved in. But we decided to start there and then make our way around to the other neighborhoods afterwards. This new street of houses wasn't too far from my place, so we all met at my house on Halloween evening. Then we headed out to begin trick-or-treating. We stopped at a few houses on the way just for some extra candy, and then turned down the sidewalk that led to the new streets. To our surprise, we didn't see any other kids walking around here. We figured we were the first ones, and we got really excited and ran over to the first house. Kind older man opened the door and gave us each a full-sized Hershey's chocolate bar. Once we were out of the driveway, we all got super excited as we were already off to a good start. But as we rang the next doorbell, nobody answered. And neither did the next house or the one after that. One thing about this street was that each house had a really big yard, so the walk between them would take almost 2 to 3 minutes. After about 10 houses not answering, we were starting to feel like we were wasting our Halloween here and not getting anything. We could see the next house though, and it was the biggest one on the street as far as we could see, so we agreed to try there first. This house had a really long driveway and led to an even larger circle driveway. As we were walking up, I saw a woman looking at us from the small window right next to the door. But as soon as I made eye contact with her, she quickly backed away. I figured she was just waiting for trick-or-treaters, and I was just glad to see that someone was home and hopefully had some candy for us. We got up onto the porch and I rang the doorbell. Almost immediately, a woman opens the door, and standing behind her was another older woman, same one that I'd seen in the window. They both smile as we say trick-or-treat, and she opens the door wider, revealing a huge round table set up inside of their large entrance room. On the table was pretty much every kind of candy you could find at a store. I couldn't believe someone would spend this much on Halloween candy, but with a house like this, I guess it made sense. She told us to come in and choose 2 of whichever candy we wanted. Without hesitating, we all ran in and over to the table to look at everything they had. All of us in that moment were so happy, getting to decide on pretty much whatever candy we wanted. But as I was trying to decide on what my second choice would be, heard the door slammed shut. All of us turned and looked at the woman standing right by the door, still smiling at us. She then asks us to stay here for just a minute as she'd forgotten to put out some dessert for us to have on our way out, and she walked away quickly. I looked around, noticing the other woman wasn't there anymore either. I could tell all of us were panicking and scared. Only seconds later, footsteps started coming towards us from down the hall. I immediately ran for the door and opened it, letting all of us outside as we could hear the woman call out for us to wait. We all ran down the driveway and didn't stop until we got all the way back to my house. We sat on my driveway, terrified and confused as to what just happened. We thought about telling my parents, but we knew they'd yell at us for stupidly going into the house when we were told so many times before to not go into anyone's home, so we didn't say anything. After a little bit, we ended up continuing our trick-or-treating in my neighborhood, being a lot more cautious and trying to make sure we weren't the only kids walking around. It was definitely the weirdest thing that happened to me on Halloween, and my friends and I still talk every Halloween about what we think those women were trying to do and what would have happened if we stayed in their house for the dessert. Last year was the first time that I'd ever lived completely alone in a house, as I had just rented a small place in a new neighborhood that was closer to my work. I moved in early October. It seemed like most of the neighbors kept to themselves, though I did as well. But everything was pretty normal otherwise for the first few weeks. Anyways, it was Halloween now, and I noticed only a couple houses actually had decorations up. They didn't have anything crazy, just a few pumpkins or signs, but it was more than any of the other houses. I decided to put up a small trick-or-treat sign on my door, and I bought a small bag of candies to hand out. Where I used to live, I'd buy 3 or 4 big bags, but I didn't get the feeling that these people really celebrated Halloween here, though I figured 1 bag would be enough. The afternoon came, and I got a few small groups of kids, but that was pretty much it. I was a little bit disappointed, as I always found Halloween to be enjoyable, even if I was just the one handing out treats at my house. Anyways, it started getting late, around 10 p.m., so I put the bag of candy in my pantry and sat on the couch to watch a scary movie to end the night on. I think I was halfway through the movie before I heard the doorbell ring. A little bit confused and annoyed, I got up and looked out the peephole to see who was there. I saw what looked like a small boy, maybe 10 or 11, standing at the door in a homemade costume. It didn't look like anything specific, just black cloth with red accents and a black mask. I opened the door and he said trick or treat. By now it was almost 11, so I was a little worried that he was alone walking door to door. I smiled and told him to wait a minute while I get him some of the candy that I'd put away. I went back to my pantry and grabbed a big handful, then brought them back to the door and dropped them in the boy's pillowcase. Then I looked around behind him to see if his parents were on the sidewalk or maybe a group of friends, but I didn't see anyone. He turned around and started walking away, but I stayed in the doorway for a few seconds just to make sure he was okay. But again, I didn't see anything or anyone, so I closed the door and went back to the couch. A couple more minutes went by before the doorbell rang again. This time, I went to the pantry first and got the bag of candy, and then headed for the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see the same kid standing there, but without a pillowcase or a bag this time. Concerned, I asked him if he was okay, to which he didn't reply. I looked around behind him again, but this time I noticed someone standing in my neighbor's driveway across the street, watching us. It looked like a full-grown man, but he was wearing a similar costume to the kids. "Is that your dad over there?" I asked nicely. It waited a second, and then said yes. And I asked him why he came back to my house, to which the boy responded asking for more candy. I was even more confused by this, because he didn't have his pillowcase, but I held out my bag of candy for him to take out of. But the boy looked almost annoyed for some reason, then reluctantly reaches in and grabs a single piece, or running off. That whole interaction creeped me out a bit, so I made sure to lock my door, and then I went back and finished the movie. It was pretty late at this point, so I decided to get ready for bed. I got up from the couch and began walking over to the stairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a light flash from outside one of my windows. I nervously went over and looked outside, then realized that it was the motion sensor lights that were by my garage. I stayed in the window, looking around for a few minutes. I was getting pretty creeped out now, but nothing else happened, so I closed the blinds and headed upstairs to my bedroom. I laid in bed for probably 30 minutes, thinking about that boy from earlier and how strange the whole thing was. But as I started to drift into sleep, I heard a soft ruffling noise, followed by loud thumping bangs at my front door. I shot up and jumped out of bed, quietly made my way downstairs and over to the front door. Just before I looked into the peephole, 3 more loud bangs shook the door and made me jump back a little. I waited there for a few seconds, then looked. It was the man that I'd seen across the street from earlier. Kid had said was his dad. He was standing there, just inches away from the door, still wearing that creepy black and red costume and a mask. I could tell something was in his hand, but he was too close to the door for me to see what it was. There was no way I was opening that door, as I had no idea what this guy could possibly want from me. I knew this was either some sick joke, or something much worse. I ran back upstairs and grabbed my phone, then locked myself in the room and called 911. The man continued banging on the door for probably a whole minute before it went silent. I waited in fear, and he had left for good. And I got up, out of my bedroom window, had a small view of the sidewalk that led to the front door. But as I was looking, sudden sound of glass shattering came from what sounded like the kitchen downstairs. I was completely terrified at this point, with no way to defend myself if they came upstairs. Thankfully, moments later I could hear police sirens down the road, followed by footsteps rushing outside from downstairs. I waited for the police to call for me at the front door, for I made my way downstairs to let them in. They searched the house to make sure the man was gone, and noticed a broken window in my kitchen where it was obvious the man had entered. I ended up staying at a hotel for the next few days just to be safe, but I guess the guy never came back. I run through the whole night in my head a lot, wondering if he was just using his kid as some weird way to gain entry into my house. I don't really know for sure, but nothing was stolen though, which makes me question what the man was really trying to do breaking in my house. Anyways, it's been almost a year now, and Halloween is in just a couple of weeks, and I'm starting to get pretty paranoid that the man from last year might come back to finish what he started. When I was a kid, I lived with my parents in a small neighborhood. Halloween was never really a big thing as far as trick-or-treating and stuff, but we'd always do something else. One thing my dad and I always loved doing on Halloween was exploring creepy or abandoned places together. It's funny, I would never do this kind of thing alone or even with friends, but with him I felt safe and I was never scared of what we might find, at least up until this day. After driving around for a while, we found a worn-down barn. This thing had to be vacant for years. The siding was half gone and the roof was caved in. If it wasn't for the little slivers of paint here and there, you would have never known it was red. We maneuvered around broken glass and slabs of wood, finding left-behind tools and garbage. And then I saw it. A cute little scarecrow perched up on the side of the barn. I pointed to it and my dad led the way. But the closer we got, the worse it started to smell. Poor guy, I heard my dad say as I looked down. There was a big wild raccoon laying motionless not too far from the scarecrow's feet. "What do you think killed it?" I asked. He examined it for a bit as I looked back up towards the figure. Then I froze. It was staring right at me. I could have sworn it was looking straight off into the distance before, but now its eyes have shifted onto me. Still smiling and sitting upright, but just the eyes had moved. "Dad?" He didn't respond. I looked over at him, and he pointed at the raccoon with a more disgusted look this time. And I saw what he was looking at. All of its insides were missing. And usually there would be a big mess or something, but the strange part about this was that it was hardly noticeable unless you looked closely. I didn't want to, but I looked up at the scarecrow once more. My stomach sank as I realized it was still staring at me, but its eyebrows that were once raised were now furrowed. Its smile was gone. Then I started to notice the scattered blood stains seeping through its raggedy clothes. I felt a sickness come over me and I got really dizzy until my dad put his hand on my shoulder. "Probably just a coyote," he said, and started leading the way out. His words made me feel better, but I wasn't too sure if I believed it. As we walked away, I looked back at the scarecrow and it was just how we found it. Looking off into the distance and smiling with its eyebrows high. I never told my dad, as I wasn't quite sure if what I saw was real or not, and I didn't want him to worry that I was seeing things and not take me on adventures anymore. I still had no idea what I was seeing or if it was even real at all. But what creeped me out the most was that my dad went back a few days later to sketch the barn with my brother, and when he came back, he showed me the pictures. but on them was no scarecrow. My friend Derek and I were both thrill seekers, and Halloween was the perfect excuse for us to go out and do something scary. We were both 18 at the time, and Halloween was in just a few days. Derek suggested that we go to an abandoned restaurant that was located just a few miles away. I'll admit, it wasn't one of those old, worn-down places, at least not from the outside. It was just a regular restaurant that shut down 3 or 4 years ago, and the property was never bought, so it gathered up garbage and had some broken windows and stuff like that. Anyways, on Halloween night, we packed a small drawstring bag with some flashlight, and then we drove over to the restaurant. We parked on the side of the street, a couple buildings away, and walked towards the front of the place. It definitely looked a lot creepier at night, and I could feel myself starting to get a little nervous. As we approached the door, we noticed a small bike leaning up against the front of the window. I kind of expected other groups of people to come here for the scary experience on Halloween, but I thought it was weird that there was only one bike. Derek tried opening the front door, but of course it was locked, but we made our way around the right side of the restaurant and found a small opened side door. We slowly walked in, found ourselves in the kitchen. It was completely trashed, tons of bottles and cans scattered on the floor. We then turned right and moved into the back room, which had a few chairs and a table, both pretty dirty looking. It was obvious that plenty of people had been here before us, probably using the restaurant as some sort of hideout or something. We were in there for a few minutes, looking around at some of the graffiti on the walls, where we heard something coming from the front of the place. It sounded kind of like a small can rolling on the ground or something. Both of us looked at each other, a little shaken, but I guess that was the whole reason we went there in the first place. Stood there silently, listening for a minute. We didn't hear anything else. I led the way, walking back through the kitchen and over to the doors that led into the main dining room. I tried to open it quietly, but it made way more noise than I was hoping. Eric followed me as I walked in and looked around the corner. Almost immediately, I noticed the can laying on the ground across the room. The way the dining room was set up, it was basically an L shape, but I could only see part of the room. Most of the tables were pushed over and the chairs were broken. I was really shocked to see the place like that, as I had always thought it looked like just some regular unsold vacant building from the outside. Anyways, I started making my way down the room, toward the other side so I could look into the other part of the dining room. You hear that? Very softly, I could hear what sounded like breathing. It was so quiet, it was hard to tell for sure though. I took a few more slow steps, and I looked around the corner. Froze, seeing an old man sitting on a chair in front of a table in the back of the dining room. He was staring at the floor, breathing softly and not moving at all. Derek grabbed me and we both rushed out of there and ran back to our car. I was so shaken up, I made Derek drive us back to his house. Spent the rest of Halloween night sitting in his room, just talking about what had happened and what we thought the guy was doing there. It's been a few years now, but every time I think about that situation and see the man sitting there, it still scares the shit out of me. I have no idea what he was doing in that place alone. Halloween has always been one of my favorite holidays ever since I was a kid. I just enjoy the whole idea of spooky season and watching horror movies and everything. Anyways, this happened last year when I was 22 and lived in a small one-story home with my roommate Alex. It was Halloween night, around 9 p.m., and all the kids had pretty much finished trick-or-treating, so I put the candy away and turned off all the lights. Then we both sat down to watch some horror movies. We finished a whole movie, and I had Alex find us another one to watch while I went into the kitchen to grab some snacks. On my way into the kitchen, I thought I saw something move by the sliding glass door that led into the backyard. startled me for a sec. I walked closer to the door, but I didn't see anything else. So I checked to make sure it was locked, and then I went to grab a bag of popcorn, made my way back to the couch. As Alex started the movie, we both heard a thud from the backyard. We looked at each other, and both went to the kitchen and over to the back door, turned on the back porch light, and then slid the door open and peeked my head out. Our yard was small, and it had a fence around it, so it would have been pretty easy to see if someone was there, but I didn't see anything. We both just assumed it must have been a neighbor, and I closed the door and we continued the movie. At some point midway through, Alex got up to grab some water. A few seconds later, I heard him whisper to me from the other room, "Dear." I could hear the genuine fear in his voice, and I immediately got a little scared too. I made my way over to him and asked what he saw, and he told me that as soon as he came into the kitchen, he saw a man run past the sliding door from outside. Although still creeped out, told him it had to be just some stupid Halloween prank. I think part of me was just saying that to try and make myself feel better too, but it didn't work for very long. Only moments later, the front doorbell rang. I led the way, and Alex followed behind me as I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. I saw a man in a white mask and dark clothing standing on the porch. I could see he was holding a pillowcase too, and it looked pretty full, as if he had a bunch of candy in it. He was just staring at the door, not even moving or looking around. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I let Alex look, and then we both decided to just ignore him and see if he leaves. We waited for a few minutes on the couch, pretty much just sitting in silence, trying to listen for anything. Then I got up and looked again, and the man was gone, but he left his pillowcase on the porch, still full. "Just call cops. Right about." I agreed with him, and we went over to get my phone from the couch. But as I walked through the hallway, I saw the man standing with his mask against the sliding door in our backyard. I yelped for Alex, and we both ran to my bedroom and locked ourselves in. Alex pulled his phone out and called 911, while I moved a dresser in front of the door just in case. We were both freaking out, and I didn't want to take any risks. Only moments later, the guy started banging on our window, and I could hear him trying to open it from the outside. We had only lived there for a few months, and I honestly had no idea if the windows were even locked or not, as neither of us have ever touched them. Alex pulled the curtain back and the man ran away. Luckily, the windows were locked. We waited in my room for almost 15 minutes, where the police showed up. The man had already run off, I guess, but when we let the cops in, we noticed the pillowcase was still on the porch. One of the officers slowly opened it and checked inside, and he grabbed it and poured it out. It was just a bunch of leaves and small sticks. The officer guessed that it was probably just some trick to try and get us to open the door so he could force his way in. With nothing really to go off of though, they ended up leaving after taking a quick look around and not seeing anything. We were still shaken by the incident, but nothing else happened the rest of the night or any day afterward. We still ended up moving out a few months later though, as we didn't feel very safe in the house after that incident. Every year, my town has a Halloween fair that opens up during the last week of October. It's basically just a bunch of Halloween-themed attractions, haunted houses, and scary corn mazes. My friends and I like to go there before we started trick-or-treating, just to get us into the Halloween mood. So just like every other year, we met up there around 5. It was pretty busy, which is expected on Halloween, but basically every attraction had a really long line that was not worth waiting in. We looked around for a bit and realized that the only thing with a short line was the corn maze. Something always made me feel weird about being in a corn maze. I think it was the fact that you kind of always feel lost and lose a sense of direction after a while. Anyways, we waited in line for a few minutes, then entered the maze. They had a bunch of creepy scarecrows and other props set up, which definitely made it more enjoyable than a regular corn maze. But after about 10 minutes, it got a little boring, It felt as though we were just walking in circles. At one point, we crossed paths with some older guy in a scarecrow costume. Just kind of walked past us without saying anything. And then a few minutes later, we crossed paths again. I thought it was part of the attraction at first, but I also thought it was weird that he didn't actually try to scare us. Then again, it would also be weird for a grown man to be walking around alone in a corn maze too. Another 10 minutes went by before we finally found our way out. We checked one more time to see how long the other lines were, but ended up just leaving. We didn't want to miss out on trick-or-treating for standing in a line on that. The fair was in the center of my neighborhood, so it made it easy to just cross a couple of streets and then start going house to house for candy. We'd gone to probably 20 houses and had made our way down a whole street, for one of my friends in the group stopped us as we were walking down the sidewalk. We looked up and towards where he was looking. Sure enough, the man in the scarecrow costume was standing on the other side of the street from us. He wasn't looking at us though. He was staring at the house that he was standing next to. We all thought it was pretty weird and knew now that the guy was definitely not working for the fair. We skipped the next few houses to get some distance from the man, just in case. Then we continued our trick-or-treating as usual. Only a couple minutes later, we all saw the creepy scarecrow guy on the same side of the road as us and walking towards us this time. It was only a few houses down from us, and by now we definitely knew that there was something wrong with this guy. We walked quickly down to the next intersection, turned left. From there, we ran as fast as we could to get to the next turn and made a right, hoping that he wouldn't have been able to see where we went. By now, we were all a little freaked out and really had no idea what this guy was trying to do, but it was definitely creepy. One of my friend's houses was just up ahead though, so we figured we could stay there for half an hour to make sure that he was gone, and then we could head back out. I'd say we were inside for 10 minutes before we heard a soft rustling sound coming from outside one of the windows in the room that we were in. We all looked at each other, terrified of what we'd see if we moved the curtain from the window. Then I got up slowly and made my way over, and I peeked behind the curtain. The man was standing just a few feet from the house, staring at the window with something in his hand. It looked like a hammer or a crowbar, but I backed away too quickly to fully comprehend what I saw. My friends knew exactly what the situation was, and we called 911 to report the guy for following us. And my friend called his parents to let them know what was going on. It took a whole 5 minutes for the police to arrive. During that time, we didn't hear or see anything else. But as soon as the sirens were nearby, we all heard footsteps running away from the backyard. When the cops came up to the door, explained in more detail what was going on, and they actually told us that there were multiple other reports of the guy in a scarecrow costume harassing people at the fair. We decided to just hang out at the house for the rest of the night. It really sucked, because it kind of ruined our Halloween. But we all still had the feeling that that guy was somewhere not far, watching and waiting for